Farmer thinking. He said it to my face, in front of 11 people, while holding 6 months of my work between 2 fingers like a dead possum he'd found on the driveway. And not a single person in that boardroom corrected him, because Keir signs their leave forms too. 6 months of my life was in that notebook. 6 months of 4 a.m. alarms, of driving out past Rakaya in the frost with the heater and my old Corolla barely working, of standing in dairy sheds while farmers who'd known me since I was in pigtails at the AMP show let me stick a moisture probe in their paddocks and tell me things they wouldn't tell an auditor in 100 years. And Keir was holding all of that between 2 fingers like it smelled. I didn't say anything. I picked up my flat white, stone cold. It had been cold for 40 minutes, I'd been nursing it since 9, and I took a sip anyway. Cold coffee doesn't taste like coffee. It tastes like patience. I've gotten very good at drinking patience. Let me back up a few seconds. Give you the full picture. What I'd done, Keir had said, turning back to the room, back to the 17th floor view of the harbor and the container ships lined up out past Devonport like toys, is take Alethea's, and here he did the thing with his hand, the little flourish, like he was introducing a support act, raw data, and I've packaged it. Given it some corporate polish. Because let's be honest, this is fantastic legwork, but it reads like a paddock diary. That's when he said it. Farmer thinking. Lightly, like it was almost a compliment, the way you'd say someone had a lovely nature but wasn't cut out for the boardroom. Nobody in that room had ever pulled a calving rope at 3 in the morning, so why would they know the difference between farmer thinking and a kind of thinking that actually keeps a supply chain from collapsing when the Cook Strait ferries cancelled for the 4th time in a fortnight? My hands have a callus. Right here, at the base of my index finger, from 6 years of clicking a soil moisture meter open and shut, in wind that comes off the Canterbury Plains with nothing to stop it between here and Antarctica. It doesn't show much. But I feel it every time I pick up a pen. I felt it then, wrapped around a cup of cold coffee in a glass tower in Auckland, 40 floors above the nearest paddock, while a man who has never once come home with mud past his ankles stood in front of my work and called it unpolished. Under the table, my boots were tucked back against the leg of my chair. Blundstones. A crust of dried Canterbury clay still on the left heel from 3 weeks ago, because I hadn't had a spare 5 minutes to clean them, and also, if I'm honest with myself, and I'm trying to be, mate, that's the whole point of telling you this, because some small stubborn part of me liked having something real hidden under all that glass and chrome. Something that had actually touched the ground. Keir clicked to his next slide. A pie chart. Bright, confident colors, the kind of chart that looks like it means something until you ask it one specific question and it falls over. He'd stripped out every regional variance I'd spent 4 months building, every seasonal weighting, every single farmer's actual numbers, and replaced it with something that would look lovely printed on a glossy handout and would be catastrophically, expensively wrong the first time it met a real winter. Obviously, he said, we'll credit the underlying legwork appropriately, and I watched him not once look at me while he said it, and I thought about all the ways I could stand up right then and detonate the whole meeting, and I thought about my rent, and I thought about the fact that Keir signs my leave forms, and I drank another mouthful of cold coffee instead. That's the version of me you're getting today. Not the version who fights. The version who's had 6 months of practice going quiet instead. I want you to understand something about Keir before this goes any further, because it's easy to hear a story like this and think the man's a cartoon. He isn't. He's worse than a cartoon, because cartoons don't vote at the Residents' Association and complain about cyclists. He genuinely believes the version of competence he's built, the vocabulary, the slide decks, the little hand flourish, is the real thing, and that people like me, who measure competence in whether the milk actually gets to Nelson Port on time, are a lower rung on some ladder he's spent his whole career climbing. He's not stupid. He's frightened. I worked that out a long time before today. A man who is genuinely competent doesn't need to hold your work between 2 fingers like it's contaminated. He needs it to look small so that his hands, holding nothing of his own, don't look empty. The door didn't knock first. That's the thing I remember most clearly, more than the pie chart, more than the words farmer thinking, the door to the boardroom just opened, no knock, no assistant popping her head in first to check, and every single person at that table turned like we'd been caught at something. Magnus Sterling doesn't wear a suit like a man who's ever been comfortable in one. He wears it like a man who owns 40 of them and still feels, underneath, like he should be in overalls. Chairman of the Export Federation. The kind of name that gets whispered before board meetings the way you'd whisper about weather coming in off the Tasman. You don't argue with it, you just get ready. He didn't look at Keir's slide. He didn't look at the harbor view everyone in that room had spent a career trying to earn an office facing. He walked straight past the head of the table, past the projector throwing that bright useless pie chart onto the wall, and he picked my notebook up off the corner where Keir had dropped it, off to one side, like scraps. He turned it over once in his hands. The leather's gone soft and dark at the corners, sheepskin, the kind that molds itself to whoever's actually using it. He opened it, not at the front, not at some random page, but 3/4 of the way through, to the section on the Ashburton catchment flows, like he already knew exactly where to look. And then he asked me a question. One specific question, about one specific farm, about a number I'd written down myself in pencil on a freezing morning in June with nobody watching, a detail so small I hadn't even put it in the summary slides, a detail that had no earthly business being known by a man who'd just walked in off the street. The room went very still. I set my cold coffee down. My hand, for the first time all morning, was not steady. Because there was only one way Magnus Sterling could have known that number. He'd have had to have seen it happen. Tarek's block, Magnus said, still holding the notebook open at that page, not looking up. You've got the flow reading here at 1100 liters a minute, off the main race, taken at what, 5:30 in the morning, by the state of the light in your handwriting. He tapped the pencil marks with one blunt finger. Most consultants take that number off a form Tarek fills in himself, sitting in his kitchen with a cup of tea, guessing. You didn't. You were standing in the ditch. Keir let out a small laugh, the kind you use to fill a silence before you've worked out what's supposed to go in it. With respect, Mr. Sterling, I think we're getting a bit lost in the granular detail here, when really the bigger picture is, I wasn't talking to you. Magnus still hadn't lifted his eyes off the page. I was talking to her. The room did that thing rooms do when the temperature drops without a window opening. Someone's chair creaked. Nobody breathed loudly. I put my coffee cup down on the table because my hand had started to do a thing I didn't want anyone to see. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. I cleared my throat, tried again. I don't understand how you'd know that. That reading isn't in any of the summary slides. It's not in the report at all. I only wrote it in there because I didn't trust the automated gauge that week. I wanted my own number to check against. I know, Magnus said. I was there. Nobody in that room said anything for what felt like a very long time, and I stood there with a cold coffee cup ring on my palm and my heart doing something ugly and fast, and Keir, you have to understand, mate, Keir cannot survive a silence he isn't controlling. Keir cannot let a room sit still for longer than 4 seconds without inserting himself back into the center of it. Well, he said, and he smiled the smile he uses in client meetings, the one that shows exactly 8 teeth, this is all fascinating, obviously, but I think what matters here for the ministry contract is the finished product, not the field notes. Alethia's data collection is excellent, nobody's disputing that, that's literally what we pay her for. My job is to take that raw material and make it presentable. That's not stealing credit, Mr. Sterling, that's called management. I want to tell you I said something in that moment. I didn't. I stood there with my hands wrapped around a cold cup, watching a man call 6 months of my working life raw material to my face, in front of the one person in the room whose opinion could actually change something, and I said nothing, because some old, tired, practical part of me was doing arithmetic. Rent. KiwiSaver. The fact that I still needed a reference from this company someday, possibly from this exact man, if this went wrong. Magnus finally looked up from the notebook. He looked at Keir for a second, not angry, which was somehow worse, just assessing, the way you'd look at a fence post to see if it was rotten before you leaned your weight on it. Management, he repeated, like he was turning the word over to check the underside of it. I've run this federation for 22 years, son. I've sat across the table from a lot of men who called stealing management. He set the notebook down, gently, the way you'd set down something that had earned a bit of care. Tell me. When did you last stand in a paddock at 5 in the morning yourself? Not send an email asking for numbers. Stand in it. Keir's jaw did something small and involuntary. I have a team for field verification. That's what teams are for. Delegation isn't a crime, Mr. Sterling. It's how any modern. I didn't ask what teams are for. I asked when you last did it yourself. And there it was. That was the pause. That's the pause where a man who has spent a career being smooth realizes smooth has just run out of road. With respect, Keir said again, he says with respect the way some men say don't take this the wrong way, as a warning that something disrespectful is arriving in about 4 seconds. I don't think my personal work habits are really relevant to whether the deliverable meets ministry standards, and I have to say, I'm a little concerned about the direction this is. They're relevant to me, Magnus said, because I'm not signing a contract with a deliverable. I'm signing one with people. And I only trust the numbers as far as I trust the person who stood in the ditch to get them. I watched something shift across Keir's face then, fast, like weather moving over the Kaikoura ranges, fear, quickly buried under something meaner. He turned to me. Actually turned, his whole body, like he'd decided the safest ground left in the room was to make this about the two of us instead of about him and Magnus. Alethea. He said my name gently, the way you'd talk to someone you were worried about, which almost worked on me, almost, because I have spent 2 years being grateful when Keir was gentle. You don't need to feel put on the spot here. Nobody's attacking your work. I think Mr. Sterling might just have some outdated ideas about how modern consultancies operate, and I don't want you caught in the middle of that. We're a team. Aren't we a team? There it was. The pull. That's the nasty part, mate, the part nobody warns you about. It's not always shouting. Sometimes the trap is somebody handing you an exit that looks kind, an exit shaped exactly like keep the peace, and all you have to do to take it is agree that none of this happened the way you both know it happened. I felt the old habit rising in my throat like it always does. Say something soft. Say we're all just talking past each other. Say something that lets him keep his 8 teeth and lets me keep my job on Monday. I'd done it 100 times before. I'd built a whole personality out of doing it. We built the model together, I heard myself say instead, quiet, but not soft. I built it. You edited the credits page. Keir's smile didn't move but something behind it did. That's a bit of an ungenerous way to characterize. You cut every regional variance out of it, I said, and now that I'd started, the words came up out of some deep old reservoir I hadn't known was full. You cut the Ashburton catchment data. You cut Tarek's numbers, and Meikle's, and the whole Wymate block, and you replaced 4 months of real field measurement with a pie chart, and you called it polish. Because the raw version isn't presentable to the ministry, Alethea, that's not an insult, that's just, you called it farmer thinking. The room had gone very, very still. Somebody near the window actually looked down at the table like they were checking their phone, had definitely not just buzzed. Keir's face did the thing faces do when a person is choosing, in real time, between backing down and doubling down, and you can watch the choice happen like weather crossing a paddock, and I have never in my life wanted so badly for someone to choose the smaller, kinder road. He didn't. I think, he said, and his voice had gone thinner, tighter, the 8-tooth smile gone entirely now, that if we're going to have a conversation about who's really equipped to run a supply chain contract worth this much money, we should probably also talk about the fact that Alethea's whole background is in dirt science, not in actual commercial strategy. I mean this kindly. You're brilliant with a soil probe. Nobody's questioning that. But there's a reason people like me exist in a business like this, and it's not because we're lazier than you. It's because knowing mud isn't the same as knowing money. Somewhere behind my ribs something that had been very carefully, very deliberately held shut for 2 years came loose. I didn't shout. I want you to know that, because I think if I'd shouted, Keir would have won something in that moment. He'd have got to be the reasonable one, the calm one, the professional one, while the woman with mud on her boots lost her temper in front of the chairman. So I didn't give him that. I put my cold coffee cup down on the table, very carefully, and I said, in a voice that came out steadier than I felt, I've been doing this since I was 19 years old, standing in my dad's shed at 5 in the morning before school, and every farmer from Urkaya to Wymaid has let me into their kitchen and told me things they wouldn't tell their own accountant, because they trust that the numbers I write down are true. That's not dirt science, Keir. That's the only thing this whole contract is actually worth. Magnus hadn't moved. He was watching the two of us the way you watch weather building over the ranges, patient, unhurried, like he already knew which way it was going to break and was simply waiting to see how long it took the rest of the room to catch up. Keir opened his mouth again, and I could see it coming, some final card he thought he still had to play, something about seniority or process or how these things are usually done, and for one long, suspended second, with my boots hidden under the chair and my notebook sitting open on the table between two men who both, for entirely different reasons, thought they had the right to decide what it was worth, nobody in that room said anything at all. Magnus got there first. Sit down, Keir. Not loud. He didn't need loud. There's a kind of quiet that lands harder than shouting, and that was it, 2 words, and Keir's mouth actually closed around whatever card he'd been about to play, and he sat, the way you sit when the ground's just been taken out from under an argument you hadn't finished making. Magnus turned the notebook so it faced the room, not just me, and rested 2 fingers on the open page, the same page with Tarek's flow reading on it, like he wanted everyone to keep looking at it while he talked. You want to know why I walked in here without an appointment, he said, and it wasn't really a question, it was him giving me the answer before I'd worked out how to ask for it. Fair enough. You've earned that much. He told it plainly. No drama in it, which somehow made it land harder than drama would have. For 4 months, before this contract ever came near a boardroom, Magnus had been driving himself out to dairy sheds before dawn, unannounced, because he'd been burned before, burned badly, a contract 2 years back built on numbers that looked beautiful on a slide and fell apart the first hard winter, cost the Federation money and cost 3 small operations their overdraft. So this time he'd decided to check things himself, quietly, the old way, before he ever put his name to a number again. Tarek's place. Meikle's. The Wymaid block. I've stood in the dark at 4:30 more mornings than I'd like to admit this year, waiting to see who actually turns up to check the truth of a thing before it gets typed into a report. He looked at me, not unkindly, not warmly either, just steady, the way you'd look at a fence you tested and found sound. Every single time. Same person. Same notebook. Nobody sent you. Nobody was watching you, or you thought nobody was. You went because the number mattered, not because anyone was going to see you get it. He didn't look at Keir when he said the next part, which I think was its own kind of mercy. I've had 6 months of glossy summaries land on my desk from this firm. Every one of them beautifully presented. Every one of them missing the one thing I actually needed, which was somebody who'd stood in the mud long enough to know when a farmer was telling you what you wanted to hear versus what was true. I came here today to find out which one of you that was. I already knew the answer. I just wanted to watch how it played out in the room, because that tells you a great deal about a company too. Nobody said the word test out loud, but that's what it had been, and everyone at that table understood it at the same moment, and I watched something in Keir's face go from wounded to hollow, the particular hollow of a man realizing the performance he'd been so proud of had been watched from the very first slide. He tried, once more, the way a man will keep pulling at a door that's already locked. Mr. Sterling, I really do think if you look at the totality of the deliverable rather than one isolated, I've looked at the totality, Magnus said. That's the problem. And that was it. No shouting. No firing anyone on the spot, no theater, nothing that would have made this a story about revenge instead of a story about the truth finally landing where it belonged. He simply turned back to me, laid one hand flat on the closed cover of my notebook, and said the thing that mattered. "I'll sign the contract. On the condition that you run it." "Not him. You." "I want to tell you I had something clever to say." I didn't. I just nodded, and my eyes went hot in a way I was furious about, because I did not want to cry in front of Keir, not after everything, not when it would look like relief instead of what it actually was, which was 2 years of being told I was raw material finally getting put down. Keir didn't apologize. "I want to be honest with you about that, mate, because I think if I told you," he turned to me afterward and said, "sorry, I built my whole career on your back, it would be a nicer story and it wouldn't be a true one." He didn't apologize. He gathered his laptop and his glossy little clicker, and he said something about needing to loop in HR about resourcing going forward, in the same flat corporate voice he'd have used to reschedule a dentist appointment, and he left the room first, before anyone could watch his face any longer than they had to. I understood, watching him go, that this wasn't really about me at all, not deep down. It never had been. Keir had built an entire identity out of never once having to stand in a ditch at 5 in the morning, out of believing that knowing the right words about a thing was the same as knowing the thing. Somewhere underneath the 8-tooth smile was a man who was, I think, genuinely afraid of what it would mean if the world found out that farmer thinking had been doing the real work the whole time and management had just been narrating it. I didn't feel triumphant watching him walk out. I felt something quieter than that. Something closer to done. Magnus stayed another minute after the room had mostly cleared, Farmers' Federation people and ministry people filing out murmuring to each other, and he picked the notebook back up, turned it over once more in his hands, the way you'd weigh something to check it was as solid as it looked. "This wants a proper cover," he said. "That leather's had a hard life." "It's been in the back of a Uda for 6 years, I said. "It's earned the wear." He almost smiled at that. Almost. Then he set it down in front of me instead of in front of himself, which felt like it meant something, and told me his office would be in touch about the paperwork within the week, and left without any further ceremony, because that's not a man who needs ceremony to know he's done the right thing. I sat there a while after everyone had gone, alone in a glass room 40 floors above the harbor, with the container ship still lined up out past Devonport, patient, unbothered by anything that had just happened in this building. I reached down under my chair without really thinking about it and touched the side of one boot. The mud on the heel had gone from wet clay to a dry pale crust weeks ago, and I hadn't cleaned it off, and sitting there I understood, properly, for the first time, that I never actually needed to hide it. It had just taken a chairman with mud of his own under 30 years of good suits to make that plain to me. Weeks later, I run my own small outfit now. 3 of us, a real office with a real leaky heater and absolutely no view of any harbor. That same notebook sits in the middle of our meeting table, sheepskin gone dark and soft at every corner, a rubber band holding the back cover on because it finally gave up under the weight of everything written into it. It isn't hidden under anyone's chair anymore. It's the first thing clients see when they sit down. Keir came to see us in March. Not for coffee. His new firm needed licensing rights to the catchment model, my model, the one he'd once held between 2 fingers like something the cat dragged in, and there was no clean way around asking for it except to come and ask, in person, in our small office with its leaky heater, for a rate 10 times what he'd once offered to credit me a footnote. I let him sit there a moment before I answered. I didn't gloat. There wasn't any pleasure in it worth having, not really, just a kind of settled quiet. The same quiet Magnus had once used on him in that boardroom. I reached across the table, opened the notebook to the very page he'd once refused to put on a projector screen, and turned it so it faced him. "Take your time reading it properly this time," I said. "There's no polish to distract you." He didn't stay long after that. He read what he needed to, signed what he'd come to sign, and left with the same flat courtesy he'd used on his way out of that boardroom months before, like a man closing a tab rather than closing a chapter. I didn't walk him to the door. One of the others did. I sat with the notebook a while after he'd gone, the rubber band still holding the back cover on, the way it's held it on since the binding gave out somewhere around Meikle's block last spring. I ran my thumb over the callus at the base of my finger, the one from the moisture meter, the one that was there long before any boardroom, the one that'll be there long after, and I noticed the pencil smudge Keir's thumb had left on the Ashburton page. He'd actually read it this time. Properly. Every number. My boots were by the door, not under any chair. There's a fresh crust of Wymate clay on the left heel from Tuesday, and nobody in this office has ever once asked me to clean them before a client comes in. I think about Magnus sometimes, out at some dairy shed before dawn, still checking things himself because trusting a slide deck cost him too much once. I think about the version of me who used to drink cold coffee just to keep her mouth shut. She got me here. I just wish someone had told her sooner that the mud was the credentials, not the thing to hide from them. The notebook stays in the middle of the table now. Sheepskin gone soft and dark at every corner. Not tucked under anyone's chair. Not held between two fingers like something the cat dragged in.